Friendship by Maurice Blanchot. How could one agree to speak of this friend, neither in praise nor in the interest of some truth? The traits of his character, the forms of his existence, the episodes of his life, even in keeping with the search for which he felt himself responsible to the point of irresponsibility, belonged to no one. There are no witnesses. Those who were closest say only what was close to them, not the distance that affirmed itself in this proximity, and distance ceases as soon as presence ceases. Vainly do we try to maintain with our words, with our writings, what is absent. Vainly do we offer the appeal of our memories and a sort of figure, the joy of remaining with the day, life prolonged by a truthful appearance. We are only looking to fill a void. We cannot bear the pain, the affirmation of this void. Who could agree to receive its insignificance? An insignificance so enormous that we do not have a memory capable of containing it, and such that we ourselves must already slip into oblivion in order to sustain it. The time of this slippage, the very enigma this insignificance represents. Everything we say tends to veil the one affirmation, that everything must fade, and that we can remain loyal only so long as we watch over this fading movement, to which something in us that rejects all memory already belongs. I know there are the books. The books remain temporarily, even if their reading must remain open to us, the necessity of this disappearance into which they withdraw themselves. The books themselves refer to an existence. This existence, because it is no longer a presence, begins to be deployed in history, and in the worst of histories, literary history. Literary history, inquisitive, painstaking, in search of documents, takes hold of a deceased will and transforms it into knowledge, its own purchase on what has fallen to posterity. This is the moment of complete works. One wants to publish everything. One wants to say everything, as if one were anxious about one thing, only one thing, that everything be said. As if the everything is said would finally allow us to stop a dead voice, to stop the pitiful silence that arises from it, to contain firmly within a well-circumscribed horizon what the equivocal, posthumous anticipation still mixes in illusory with the words of the living. As long as the one who is close to us exists, and with him the thought in which he affirms himself, his thought opens itself to us, but preserved in this very relation. And what preserves it is not only the mobility of life, this would be very little, but the unpredictability introduced into this thought by the strangeness of the end. And this movement, unpredictable and always hidden in its infinite imminence, that of dying, perhaps, arises not because its term could not be given in advance, but because it never constitutes an event that takes place. Even when it occurs, never a reality that can be grasped. Ungraspable, and henceforth entirely in the ungraspable, is the one destined to this movement. It is the unpredictable that speaks when he speaks. It is this which in his lifetime conceals and reserves his thought, separates it and frees it from all seizure, that of the outside as well as that of the inside. I also know that in his books, Georges Bataille seems to speak of himself with a freedom without restraint that should free us from all discretion. But that does not give us the right to put ourselves in his place, nor does it give us the power to speak in his absence. And is it certain that he speaks of himself? The I whose presence his search seems still to make manifest when it expresses itself, toward whom does it direct us? Certainly toward an I very different from the ego that those who knew him in the happy and unhappy particularity of life would like to evoke in light of a memory. Everything leads one to think that the personless presence at stake in such a movement introduces an enigmatic relation to the existence of him who indeed decided to speak of it, but not to claim it as his own, still less to make of it an event of his biography, rather a gap in which biography disappears. And when we ask ourselves the question, who was the subject of this experience, this question is perhaps already an answer, if even to him who led it, the experience asserted itself in the interrogative form, by substituting the openness of a who without answer for the closed and singular I. Not that this means that he had simply to ask himself, what is this I that I am? But rather more radically to recover himself without reprieve, no longer as I, but as who, the unknown and the slippery being of an indefinite who. We must give up trying to know those to whom we are linked by something essential. By this, I mean we must greet them in the relation with the unknown in which they greet us as well, in our estrangement, friendship, this relation without dependence, without episode, yet into which all the simplicity of life enters, passes by way of the recognition of the common strangeness that does not allow us to speak of our friends, but only to speak to them. Not to make of them a topic of conversation, our essays, but the movement of understanding in which, speaking to us, they reserve, even on the most familiar terms, an infinite distance, the fundamental separation on the basis of which what separates becomes relation. Here, discretion lies not in simple refusal to put forward confidence, how vulgar this would be even to think of it, but it is the interval, the pure interval, that from me to this other who is a friend measures all that is between us, the interruption of being that never authorizes me to use him or my knowledge of him, were it to praise him. And that, far from preventing communication, brings us together in the difference and sometimes the silence of speech. It is true that at a certain moment, this discretion becomes the fissure of death. I could imagine that in one sense, nothing has changed in the secret between us that was capable of taking place, in the continuity of discourse, without interrupting it. There was already, from the time in which we were in the presence of one another, this imminent present, though tacit, of the final discretion. And it is on the basis of this discretion that the precaution of friendly words calmly affirmed itself. Words from one shore to the other shore. Speech responding to someone who speaks from the other shore, and where, even in our life, the measurelessness of the movement of dying would like to complete itself. And yet, when the event itself comes, it brings this change. Not the deepening of the separation, but its erasure. Not the widening of the caesura, but its leveling out and the dissipation of the void between us, where formerly there developed the frankness of a relation without history. In such a way that at present, what was close to us not only has ceased to approach, but has even lost the truth of extreme distance. Thus, death has the false virtue of appearing to return to intimacy those who have been divided by grave disagreements. This is because with death, all that separates disappears. What separates puts authentically in relation the very abyss of relations in which lies, with simplicity, the agreement of friendly affirmation that is always maintained. We should not, by means of artifice, pretend to carry on a dialogue. What is turned away from us also turns away from that part which was our presence. And we must learn that when speech subsides, a speech that for years gave itself to an exigency without regard, it is not only the exigent speech that has ceased. It is the silence that it made possible, and from which it returned along an insensible slope toward the anxiety of time. Undoubtedly, we will still be able to follow the same paths, and we can let images come, and we can appeal to an absence that we will imagine by deceptive consolation to be our own. We can, in a word, remember. But thought only knows that one does not remember. Without memory, without thought, it already struggles in the invisible, where everything sinks back into indifference. This is thought's profound grief. It must accompany friendship into oblivion.